We have a few people in the studio and then several of you on the phone. With us right now is Majority Leader Tony Sertich. The speaker should be with us shortly, and Representative Sertich, maybe you could start with an opening comment.
Sure. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for joining us on the phone as well. We have just concluded our legislative session about 10 minutes ago. Got done on the last day of session. It was a little bit unusual at the end because we had a less than 1 day special session, actually during the allotted time. The issue, I'll get to the meat of this in a second, but just to inform those who weren't able to follow us closely over the last 24 hours, we came to agreement with the governor on the solution to the budget deficit late last evening, probably around the 11 o'clock hour. We would have had the ability to send the budget solution to the governor, but not in the way that he liked, first off, and secondly, he requested more time to read the information and make sure that everyone understood what was in the legislation. So for that reason, he called a brief special session for this morning so that he would have enough time to look through the legislation and make sure that we were all in agreement. So we just wrapped that up. It can be hard to remember the entire session, but I just want to start from the beginning. When we started this session, we really had our focus on a few main priorities: jobs, education, healthcare, and looking out for middle-class Minnesotans. We started on the healthcare front fairly quickly in passing a GAMC reform, a reform that we came to find out later did not work quite as we expected, and I'll get to that later. Concurrently, we worked on two jobs bills. First, our traditional jobs bill, sometimes called a bonding or capital investment bill, and that bill was passed in record speed. Generally, it takes a legislature months, and they're working up to the last day to pass that jobs bill. We got it done in record time, and creating tens of thousands of jobs in the state of Minnesota in our construction trade industry, our architects, our engineers, and jobs all over the state of Minnesota. Our second jobs bill we passed earlier in session as well dealt with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and biotechnology and research and development, had more tax credits in it for a different sector of our economy, but two jobs bills were passed very quickly. And then we moved on to balancing the state budget. There was a court case decision that happened in the middle of it, which then for the final 2 weeks ballooned our need to find a solution to $3 billion, and we got that all done. And really the key points were, for us, were our priorities. We wanted to prioritize our kids, our seniors, middle-class Minnesotans. And so that's what we did. No cuts to our schools, no cuts to nursing homes, and we made sure that we didn't go any further in cuts that would affect property taxes than what the governor proposed. And so here we are, done at the end of session after intense negotiations, and in these difficult economic times, what you saw from the DFL leadership in the legislature is we stepped up to the challenge and met it. We made the tough decisions. We led in difficult times. We found where we needed to compromise, and we got the job done. And for that, I think Minnesotans can be proud of our product, warts and all, because we didn't agree with every solution in here, but that is the true definition of compromise. And so I'll turn it over to the Speaker of the House, who has joined us, and she can start with some comments, and then we will open it up for questions.
Well, good afternoon, I think. Is that right? Are we at afternoon?
Not yet.
Not quite. Okay. And I think it's Monday. At least that's what I have been told. Happy Sin de Mai to all you Norwegians out there as well. This has been a session that's been very focused on jobs from the very get-go. Exactly what the Majority Leader said. The passage of the bonding bill early, the passage of jobs too, the passage of the option to be able to opt in to early MA is important. It protects or creates 22,000 jobs, will cover 102,000 Minnesotans, and it's important because it's also really taxpayer protection, frankly. When you get down to it, Minnesota sends more of its tax dollars to Washington, D.C. than we get in return. And this is an effort where by applying early for early MA option, we'll be able to bring home to Minnesota $1.2 to $1.4 billion more than we are getting today. And it's going to help protect and create those jobs that I talked about, the 22,000 direct health care jobs, and it's going to cover 102,000 Minnesotans with health care. I think that's an important piece of what we worked on here. It also protects nursing homes and seniors in nursing homes from cuts, and it really looks after the most vulnerable Minnesotans. And that's tough to do in a time when the budget deficit is so large. Now, there are going to be challenging times ahead. There's no doubt about it. But what we have done here is to stand up for our priorities that are Minnesota values: education, our seniors and aging population, our middle class and middle class jobs, and also standing up to make sure property taxes cannot skyrocket even farther. And in fact, I just want to be a little clear. Governor Pawlenty, at the beginning of this session, recommended deeper cuts in local government aid that would drive up property taxes. We were able to hold that down to a very bare minimum this year, and I think that's important. When family budgets are really stressed, it is harder to take on that property tax burden.
We can start with some questions if you'd like, and we do have a few people in the studio too, so if you can't hear the question, we can repeat it. But if somebody on the phone would like to begin, maybe either Joe or Eric, since you have been on hold the longest, for either the Speaker or Majority Leader. Hello?
Well, this is Todd at Prairie Public.
Okay, great.
I was wondering, LGAs took a hit during the session here again, and I'm sure that when I'm going to talk to the Moorhead mayor, he's going to say that, you know, the local governments are shouldering the weight of the state once again. How do we... Is there a way to make this a better fit for local governments?
It's going to be very important in the next legislative session that the new governor and the new legislature work to reestablish that respect in the partnership between local governments and state government. We were able to hold down that reduction in local government aid, I believe $100 million, where the governor had proposed upwards of $400 million this year, and a $400 million reduction. Every single year that we have been the majority leading for the last 4 years, we have not proposed reductions to local government aid, because we do believe there's a direct relationship to keeping good quality services and holding property taxes down. In fact, previous years we were able to increase local government aid. This has been a very tough situation, and when you're balancing a $3 billion budget, and this budget area we were able to hold it to $100 million, I'd say that's pretty darn good right now. But there is work to be done in this area going forward.
Todd, this is Tony Sertich as well, and especially to the other folks on the line from rural Minnesota. I think what we would tell the mayor from Moorhead especially is, and I know he knows Representative Marquardt very well. Legislators and politicians talk about reform a lot, and last year Representative Marquardt, the chair of our Property Tax Committee, led the charge to reform the way the fiscal relationship is between state government and local units of government, cities and counties and others. And there is a better way to do that system. We unfortunately cannot convince the governor of that, but like the Speaker said, with the new governor and the legislature next year, there are better ways that we can do this. And as House DFL caucus, we're looking to reform government in a positive direction.
The other piece of that is we passed that bill very early in the session, I think end of March, and so that allowed local units of government, cities, towns, and counties to be able to adapt their budget more quickly to that reduction and not waiting till the last minute, late in May, to be doing that.
Is what passed today in terms of the budget solution, does that represent a long-term budget fix for the state? And if not, why wasn't that reached?
So the question was, if the budget solution passed today represents a long-term budget solution. I think that what you saw Democrats in the House and Senate standing up for time and time again was a more balanced approach, using forms of revenue to help balance the budget. The fact of the matter is our economy has been hit very, very hard by this Great Recession. And previous to the recession, there was a kick the can down the road mentality by Governor Pawlenty of never dealing with the long-term problem. There's had been about $1 billion deficit since early in Tim Pawlenty's days as governor. And so now that has snowballed with the effect of the Great Recession and that ongoing kick the can down the road. And so we much rather would have preferred a fair and balanced approach where revenue was included, especially making sure that those Minnesotans who've been doing well in this economy, and there are some out there that have been doing quite well, would have paid more of their fair share. Because the fact of the matter is the cuts that have happened and the property taxes that have been raised over the last 8 years are a form of taxation. The cuts in reduced services, the increased tuition, the increased property taxes hurt Minnesota families. And Governor Pawlenty has been unwilling to listen to that message of Minnesotans.
Yeah, middle-class Minnesotans have been getting hammered by this economy. And as the speaker said, some of the decisions that are made fall on their backs a little heavier from time to time. We did not get into this budget situation overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time to get out of it. I think we took a good first step this year. More work needs to be done next year. And it's going to take that blended approach. Some say you can do it with all revenue. Some say you can do it with all cuts. And some say you can just reform your way out of it. I'm of the opinion that it's going to take all three, a blended approach, a balanced approach. And we tried to do that this year, and we were rebuffed by the governor. But I think in future years, it will happen, not because people want to, because it will be the only option left is to blend that approach.
Question about the MA expansion language that's in this bill. It's clear that we have a governor now who's resistant and unwilling to do that early enrollment and diagnosis. And at least one candidate for governor is similarly resistant. What is there in that language that might help a resistant governor change his mind?
Well, it does. It tries to blend two things together. First of all, I think most of us feel that it would be better if we made the application sooner than later to the federal government for the early option. And I want to be very clear. Wisconsin has had a similar waivered program for 3 years now. They call it Badger Care. And it has worked well. It preceded the passage of the federal health care reform. What the federal health care reform allowed states to do is to bypass having to go through that waivered process that can be very long and cumbersome for a state and go to an application process. And our state is one of those allowed to do it early. What it may allow to happen here is for the department to do the work ahead of time on the application. And that way, maybe Governor Pawlenty will still direct the department to make the application based on, what he says about bringing home our federal dollars into the state. I think he might be interested in that. If he doesn't, it allows the next governor within the first 15 days of being in office to sign an executive order that would direct the department to do that. And the hope there is the work can be done for the application process to be ready to go and that Minnesotans can see the benefit of the program sooner.
Following up, does this language in this bill require that the department do that preliminary work now, or is that still at the discretion of the executive branch?
The effective date of MA in the state is marked at July 1st, 2010. So I think right there it does encourage the department to go out and begin the application process. They would need the executive order from the governor to turn in and submit the application.
Speaker, I would just like to add on this MA option. I've learned a lot about healthcare over the past 2 years being a leader in the legislature. A lot of the times, legislators are very issue-specific around here, and they get to know a subject area. As leaders, we have the great fortune to learn a lot about different areas. What I've learned in this discussion about this MA option, for those that aren't following it closely, this issue unfortunately got caught up in some politics at the end of session, some Washington politics, some extreme politics, and that was unfortunate. The national health care reform that passed earlier this year in Washington, D.C., has what some think are some controversial pieces, and I won't go into those. But what I can tell you is this early MA option that the speaker spoke of is not a controversial piece. You don't need to look at political philosophies. All you need to do is know basic math. Minnesota ranks 46th in the nation for the amount of dollars we get back from Washington for the taxpayer dollars we put in. For every dollar we send in tax dollars to Washington, we only get 72 cents back. When you look at this MA option, we would receive $1.4 billion of our tax dollars back to the state of Minnesota. And that money would go to our hospitals, to our doctors, to our providers. This would create or maintain 22,000 jobs, ensure 100,000 more Minnesotans. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, and I just want to throw a few more at you. I want to put this in perspective, this $1.4 billion, and why it's really about math and it's not about politics. If you think about the FMAP money, this is also federal money that Democrats and Republicans both feel, and the governor even put into his budget solution. That was $400 million coming from Washington. There wasn't a lot of angst from conservatives from accepting that federal money. The MA option is 4 times as large, and it comes from our same federal government. And let me be even more clear. There was a lot of talk about a race to the top application. This would be education dollars that the Pawlenty administration applied for, federal dollars that the Pawlenty administration applied for and was turned down for. This would have been about $60 million. The Pawlenty administration wanted those federal dollars. The MA option is 20 times as large, coming from our same federal government, our tax dollars, Minnesota tax dollars, coming back to Minnesota. So I think we need to take our partisan blinders off and look at basic math. It's a fairness issue. Minnesotans deserve their tax dollars back from Washington. This MA option would deliver that, would bend the cost curve for those who have health care, and would provide fair compensation to our hospitals, doctors, and providers.
Wayne Cox has referred to it as knowing you have a winning lottery ticket, but not having money to buy the lottery ticket.
God, I wish I was Wayne Cox right now. I said a really long thing, and he said it a lot better.
I've got the governor has insisted and will again today that we've oversimplified your budget balancing bill by saying, he had said that your budget balancing bill with $400 million in revenue would still leave the state with this $5 billion hole in the next biennium. True, false, because he'll say it again today, so I just would like you preemptive to respond.
Well, I think that what we did pass and what the governor would agree to, and the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans, is something that we passed that does not help in the long term as much as having real revenue coming into the state budget. And, you know, this is, I think, one of the big differences is that revenue coming in was going to help in the long term, help pay back that school borrowing faster, help in making sure that we had at the end of the next biennium and the next biennium a little better chance of being on stable fiscal ground again. And so I think you just have to say that, you know, one of the things we kept telling the governor is to cut deeper, we needed some revenue to be able to cut deeper, and he could just never meet us halfway, even maybe one part of a way there. It wasn't really something that he was interested in doing.
You balanced 2/3 of the budget by, using your words, borrowing from the schools. But the bill does require you to at least start making payments.
Correct.
When can the schools expect to be repaid?
Right now, with no revenue, I believe it is going to take quite a while based on our current projected forecast. It probably is somewhere between the 8 to 10 year mark. It could be even longer if our economy doesn't pick up. One of the things the next governor is going to have to do is be able to work with the legislature and pay that back faster. That comes by making sure you're taking a balanced approach as you're balancing up the budget.
As Democrats, we wanted to pay that back faster, and we had a plan and a way to start doing that. Unfortunately, the governor held his ground and refused that. What's also important is, and I want to keep going back to this, even though it happened a few months ago, that's where the jobs bills are also important as well. Part of the way we get out of this mess is by having a better economy. And we play a key role in that by our job investment that we did for our construction sector, for our small businesses. We play a key role by making sure that tuition is affordable at college, that we have job training programs, that we take care of our education system and our healthcare system. The cuts that are made, cuts also have a jobs impact to the negative as well. So we wanted to minimize that negative jobs impact by the cuts. And I think we did a better job by having better priorities than the governor of where we cut.
Did Education Minnesota play too hefty a role in derailing education reform?
I think that's really been an overblown issue about, some people think it's about one particular group. I would say that what I observed is some issues, and you probably saw it play out again here in the late hours of the session, when a very modest education bill conference committee report came to the Senate floor, and the Senate rejected it and sent it back to conference committee. Then in the governor's office in the very early morning, we assembled a new education bill that the governor said he would be willing to sign, that stripped out any of the things that had been talked about on the Senate floor that were a problem. And once again, on the House floor, you saw Republicans reject that. I'm not exactly sure why. It was a very non-controversial bill. It actually had provisions for a number of Republicans who represent districts that needed transfers to their levies. To me, it's just sort of shocking. I think the level of partisanship and divide around education has really grown this year, and some of it's a philosophical divide between a lot of members of the House and Senate who are teachers, who some who support alternative licensure, others who are vehemently against it. And so I just have never seen the legislature becoming so divided over a broad set of issues that, frankly, we need to be on the same page. So I think what is needed to happen is to have some leadership that brings people together around these issues and puts front and center the good of kids instead of what has seemed to be kind of a gamesmanship around education right now.
I want to amplify the speaker's point on that, Eric and others. When you look at education reform and why it did not progress further, I will be very blunt. It was a lack of executive leadership. Governor Pawlenty has always had an adversarial relationship with teachers in the state of Minnesota. And, you know, that adversarial relationship stems from his strong criticisms of teachers. When the Race to the Top application was being done, one of the key points of getting enough points to have a successful application was buy-in from teachers. Governor Pawlenty chose to fly around the state and bash teachers instead of bringing them to the table. So I think leadership starts at the top, and where the blame needs to lie is at the executive level. We do need a leader who can bring Democrats and Republicans, teachers and administrators, rural and metro, together. Governor Pawlenty failed to do that on education reform, and that's unfortunate. But the good news is we have elections coming up, and we can change that.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Just to throw it out there, did the endorsement from Education Minnesota to your gubernatorial campaign play any role in that legislation that they didn't support not passing?
None whatsoever. I've had a position that I have adopted through a lot of reading about effectiveness of alternative licensure. And the fact of the matter remains, the most effective teacher you can put in front of a young person as a mom with kids in public school is a well-qualified, well-trained teacher who has classroom management skills. And, you know, I believe we should be using the evidence, the scientific evidence of what makes a difference. And what makes a difference is the best trained teacher you can possibly do. That's why I'm such a strong supporter of actually the work that the Bush Foundation is doing, which is work that is happening with our colleges of education. The state can play a role in this, and I think that that's the direction we need to move. We need to recruit, attract, train, and retain and mentor teachers from an earlier stage, and people who have a career where they want to go into teaching, that pathway works for them as well. And so it's not about lowering standards. It's not about making it easier. It's about actually making sure we are getting the best and brightest in the field of teaching, paying them well, training them well, mentoring them well, and putting them in classrooms where they can make a difference.
It sounds like you're opposing the Obama administration's initiative to bring well-trained professionals from other careers into teaching.
We actually did have some changes to our mid-career pathway that could have passed here, that would have been helpful, I think, to update that law that passed many years ago. So I'm not opposed to that. I believe that that should be in tandem with the high training that is needed to make sure that classroom management is happening, curriculum development is happening. And, I feel quite strongly. This is an area where I believe the research is actually on the side of people who are in support of the well-trained teacher.
Speaker Kelliher, this is Mike McEntee at the Uptake. I wanted to back up to one subject from earlier, the MA. The option here is obviously for the next governor to do something about it. Assuming that might be you, what would you do?
I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't hear it. Was it on the early option?
Yes, the early option. Would you support that if you were governor?
I would support it. I would sign that executive order early on in that first 15 days. I think it's very important for us to be applying for early option MA, and the reason why is it is important to cover those 102,000 Minnesotans, to protect and grow those 22,000 jobs, and to get our federal taxpayer dollars back into the state.
And then, I guess for both of you, when you have negotiations, they're supposed to be give and take, and the governor has been characterized as all take and no give. Did the GOP actually give anything in these last days of negotiations that changed their position from, a week ago?
I believe that there were changes that were made. In the bill that was passed, a number of on-allotment changes were made in terms of the priorities of those on-allotments. The ability of us to apply early MA would never even be a possibility here without the language that is in the bill today. The no cuts to nursing homes, the no further cuts to local government aid to hold down property taxes, the ability to also enhance the general assistance medical care provisions that we passed early in the year is very important to rural hospitals. That was not something the governor was even talking about. And so that really came onto the table in the last 48 hours, and we think that's an important thing, not just for our rural hospitals, but for the whole healthcare system in the state of Minnesota to make sure that patients get good care.
And to my friends, especially my rural friends who are on the phone, when we passed GAMC fix earlier in the session, what happened was the Pawlenty administration went out and negotiated with a few metro hospitals and gave them basically a better deal than was offered our rural hospitals, to the point where we had a two-tier system in the state, basically, for health care at our hospitals. And so what was very important, and what the DFL caucus with the Speaker's leadership did, was made sure we now have a level playing field. The same deal that was offered to the metro hospitals is now being offered to our rural hospitals. And that's very important. We're talking about jobs again at some of our largest employers in rural Minnesota, and we're talking about healthcare fairness. So now we get the same deal that the metro hospitals do. And that only happened because the Speaker and DFL leadership of the Democrats in the legislature put that on the table at the end and fought hard for it.
And one of the important things here to remember is the early MA option. If we take the application and are put into the ability to do that, the entire group covered by general assistance medical care in the state moves into that early option MA. And that pays our nurses and doctors at a much better rate. It will help our hospitals be more stable. And to that end, we also put an additional $10 million into the uncompensated care pool in general assistance medical care. That's going to help provide a bridge for those hospitals and clinics to get through to the time when early MA can be in place.
Now that the session's over, especially you, Speaker Kelliher, how do you think that session will play out in the campaign, only because we've had comments from Tom Emmer, for example, we need to reform government and things like that. I mean, what role will how this session play in the campaign?
Well, I think that this has been a session about jobs, about reforming health care, about being able to deliver on basic things that are important to Minnesotans, like protecting our seniors in nursing homes, making sure we're protecting the property taxpayers and the middle-class Minnesotans, and being able to protect our kids in schools, in their classroom. And I think that time and time again, there is going to be a real difference between the candidates for governor on these issues. It seems like Tom Emmer has picked up what I like to always call the Tim Pawlenty budget axe, and his axe seems to be even larger. He wants to cut something like, I think it was something like 20, it was like 1/3 or more of the entire state budget out. And so I just want Minnesotans to think about that for a second. I think that would severely damage our K-12 education system. It would eliminate, he has called for the elimination of local government aid, and that would decimate our communities across the state, especially hitting hard our rural communities. He has time and time again really been against almost everything that Minnesotans have been for, things like the Legacy Amendment and the work that's been done to put that money into better habitat, clean water, are things that Tom Emmer's been against.
I want to answer the question too, even though it's about my good friend Margaret. She said some nice things in her retirement speech about me, so I guess this is my opportunity to say some nice things back. And I don't want to get too much into the campaign, so I'll just speak about Margaret as I know her as a leader in the legislature. Some people talk about leading, some people talk about reform. Margaret does it. Margaret walks the walk. She has been a solid leader for the state of Minnesota in her role as Speaker of the House. When you talk about bringing people together, time and again you talk to Democrats or Republicans, the person in the room who's leading, who's bringing people together, is the Speaker of the House, Margaret Anderson Kelliher. She brings Democrats and Republicans together. She brings rural and metro people together. She brings business and labor together. And that's the sort of leadership we need. We don't need a talker. We need somebody who does it. And the Speaker has shown in 4 years as a leader in the state of Minnesota, bringing balanced budgets together, making the tough calls, bringing people together, standing up for Minnesotans and their values. She's done an excellent job. We're going to miss her in the legislature, but I hope she doesn't move on too far. She just moves across the street into the governor's residence, and we can continue that strong working relationship with her. I know the legislature would be better off for it, and Minnesotans would as well.
Wow. Thanks.
No problem.
Representative Sertich, on that note, House Speaker for next year, are you going to be running for it?
Well, I will qualify that with a lot of ifs. There's a lot of things that happen between now and next session. I will be running for re-election of my House seat. We will be running a vigorous campaign as a House DFL caucus. So if I win my re-election, if the House stays in the majority, which I think and know it will, I would definitely be interested in that job. All right.
All right.
We're going to get some rest, and thank you all for joining us. And if you have any other further questions, please contact our media staff, and we will be available.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.